All right. We are live and we've been waiting for this one. I have to tell you, I am so excited to be able to bring you this special guest today because I have been a huge fan of today's guest for a long time because of the incredible value and the transparency of his communication. And so today we're going to dive deep into trauma, everything that trauma is, everything that it entails, how it affects us. And we're going to talk about a specific type of trauma, and that is the trauma of self doubt. A lot of the time, when we talk about trauma, we think about the really tragic things that are commonly known as traumatic. But the truth is that there are many other aspects of life and experiences that may not be tragic, but can still cause trauma that affects our emotions, our thoughts, our behaviors, and the underlying cause. That trauma can become the underlying cause of vicious cycles that we experience in relationships, in our business, and so forth. And so today's guest is Yats Palat. Over the years, he has ventured into the world of social psychology, developmental psychology, neuroscience, relational associations, attachment theory, and one of my favorite topics that he talks about, reparenting. And he puts all of these techniques combined together in information and courses and coaching that help us to heal the trauma that so often holds us back and weighs us down from being able to become our strongest, most powerful selves, from being able to get in the uncomfortable spaces that allow for the greatest growth and to be able to overcome, right? Like if we can't get rid of the weight that is on us, then it becomes really difficult for us to overcome and for us to strengthen and for us to grow. So, we're going to dive deep into overcoming the trauma of self doubt today with none other than Yats Palat. Thank you so much for being here with us today and welcome to the show. It's so good to have you.
Absolutely. It's so awesome to be here. I'm glad we finally got to put this together. So thank you.
Yes.
Thanks for having me.
So we were scheduling this for quite a little bit between time differences and things going on in his life and in my life and in everything else. It finally happened. So we're here and we're ready to dive into this conversation. But before we get into the goodies that I know you're going to bring us and the tips and the suggestions, I want to know what drove you into this particular topic.
That's a great question. First, thank you for that introduction. That was stellar. I feel like I need to hire you anytime I go on to any conferences and stuff and be like, Gigi, go up before me. Let them know who I am. That was very flattering, but I appreciate everything that you said. Really, actually, I was talking to one of my employees today and I said that the greatest thing that has given me the knowledge to share this with people is experience. You asked me what it is that got me into this field, into this space. Truth be told, it was my own life, quote unquote, being fucked up in different spaces and going through certain levels of trauma, especially around relationships. In fact, there was one major relationship that rocked me on my ass like many, many years ago. And I went into a spot of depression. I wasn't able to function at work properly. And it was so interesting for me because my relationship life was suffering, but for some reason I couldn't function or focus on anything else. And so it got me to start thinking, why is it that a relationship is the basis and a trauma from the relationship is the basis of how I function everywhere? And I started to dig deeper and deeper. And as I started to understand, I realized it wasn't even the relationship, but how I attached to it, how I got stuck to it, what it meant to me, how I extract my identity from it. And that's when I realized that as human beings, we constantly seek validation, connection, and association in everything around us more than we do inside ourselves. And that's primarily because of how we were raised, our conditioning, our trauma, and everything else. So really that's what first got me into this field, and learning how to become a better version of myself just got me to get better and better at it, enough so that I learned enough so I could teach people. So really that's what it was.
I love that. I feel like we often find ourselves curious about helping others in the spaces in which we have at some point needed the most help. And it seems to me, I mean, that's definitely been my experience with myself and my space of coaching with mindset and overcoming the limiting beliefs that used to hold me back, my money mindsets, my relationship mindsets, and so many other spaces of mindset work. And I find that that is my my most the area of coaching in which I'm most interested, because it's where I had to do the most healing and the most overcoming. And so I find every time I talk to coaches, I often ask, what made you dive into this particular space of coaching, in this particular space of helping others to grow? And I find that it comes usually from their own healing and their own space, right? It's never like, well, I'm going to do this just because it's going to help somebody else, or just because it's going to help the world to be a better place, but often because I know how much this hurts and I want to help others to overcome that pain as well. So I find that absolutely stunning. But can we start by defining trauma? Because I was mentioning in the intro how there is a misconception about trauma, right? And we often think of trauma just as that thing that is either because of abuse, right? Like physical or mental abuse, or like rape, or like or like a really terrible tragic car accident, or like these really big events that when you think that word trauma, you think like really large things, right? But there are other events in life that can also cause trauma that may not be categorized as traumatic for both. Can we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you asked that question, because I have to answer this a lot to people when, I say, oh, these patterns came from your childhood and from like the subtle traumas that you absorbed. And they're like, but my childhood was perfect. Like I had nothing major or bad happen to me, like I don't have anything traumatic. And so then when I ask them what their definition of trauma is, it's this stereotyped definition that trauma means something crazy, abusive, heavy, or bad, something that was so impactful that I will remember. But the truth is actually trauma can be very, very subtle. In fact, and I like to give this example a lot, when you're a child and when you're born into this world, you don't actually have a developed forebrain. In fact, you're lacking most of your forebrain. So you have the reptilian brain, the brain that's just about, eating, breathing, pooping, all the stuff, emotions that a child needs to have. And so you don't know who you really are, which is what's amazing about babies and children, is that they don't know what color they are. They don't know what language they speak. They don't know where they're from. How they learn about themselves is how they're exposed to the world treating them. And so for these little children, if they exist in a world where love is held back, where validation is held back unless the baby behaves like the parent, or the baby shows up in a way that the parent wants them to, or the child is is performing for the parent in some way, shape, or form. If love is being held otherwise, the child starts to process these little things as subtle trauma. The child starts to think to themselves, I am not lovable just as I am, and therefore my parents or my family or someone's holding love back. They're not going to really understand, oh, my dad was in the military or had trauma or was invalidated as a child, so he's doing the same to me. They're not going to understand any of that. They just process these things as making something mean about them. And so something even as subtle as if a mother has a whole bunch of children and she's holding one baby or child close to her chest, the baby feels so safe and complete. But let's say something happens. Let's say one of the other children throws a tantrum. Now, this mother suddenly diverts her attention onto this child and has to put down the child in her arms. And when she does that, this child who's in her arms, when he goes in the cradle or he's on the bed, he's suddenly thinking, why the hell is that guy or that girl worth more than I am? Like, what makes them crave and achieve the attention more than my parent does? And so unless the parent comes back and revalidates this child, that child processes this as a moment of invalidation trauma, as being invalidated and finding someone else more valuable than them. And so life now becomes this like subtle series of moments where this child growing to an adult saves these memories, saves these small little things in their subconscious to tell them that I have to keep proving myself, because if I don't, my loved one is going to leave me for someone else. My loved one's going to choose someone else. I have to throw a big tantrum, because if I don't make a big fight and a hoo-ha and have drama in my life, then that means I'm probably not going to get the attention. Somebody else will. So all of these little things stay with our conditioning, and they start determining how we create our relationships.
Yeah. And I can hear in the stories that are in the examples that you were sharing right now, how so many of these underlying traumatic experience are sometimes completely unknown to us, stuff that we don't think that we have an issue with, but it's not until we gained the awareness of our repeated behaviors that we understand that the underlying issue is in fact something that caused a trauma that is now guiding our decision making or our understanding of the world. And so what would you say before we dive into self-doubt specifically, what would you say are some of the main spaces that you've seen, other than the, like the really powerful traumatic stuff, but what would you say are some spaces that you see that we have trauma that we are unaware of?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think some of the most valid ones are a parent who is emotionally unavailable. Not a parent who is emotionally abusive, but a parent who is emotionally unavailable. So
Mm.
most people will process this as thinking, oh, my dad and my mom, they were just really busy. So especially when someone has a single mom or a single dad whose life is about being both parents and is really busy and tough, hasn't been able to give the child validation, no one really thinks a lack of love is trauma. Everybody thinks that only if someone abuses me, that's traumatic. Whereas not getting what a child deserves and needs to grow is very traumatic, which is why like research shows, unfortunately, that children who move from like foster home to foster home or go from like, who've been given up for adoption by a biological parent, subconsciously, without even knowing that they were adopted, have such strong abandonment issues. They don't know why, but they know that in their head something tells them they were given up, so they weren't loved enough. So some of the most like subtle ways are when, if we observe a parent who's too busy to give us a hug, or when we've asked for love was just not available, a parent who works too much and prioritizes their coping mechanisms above our own. So people just think, if my dad and my mom was an alcoholic, then that means something's bad. But they could have had another coping mechanism, which is work. Like your dad or your mom may have been addicted to work because that's where they felt safe. And as a
Mm.
child, you just don't get enough interaction from them. You don't get enough connection from them. And so these are some really small ways where, as a child, you don't logically think, I'm not getting what I deserve. But your subconscious is telling you, yes, you're definitely not getting what you deserve. Maybe there's something wrong with you. That's what we process them as. Um, and when we move into relationships, these things become really evident. We'll attract a partner who's obsessed about work, a partner who is emotionally unavailable. And our journey will be to try and prove to them that we're lovable, because we still think we're trying to prove to our parents that we're lovable.
Wow. I'm hearing two things right now. One of them is how anybody watching right now can uncover some of these things, right? Like the story we tell ourselves, even in just hearing you share these examples, like, oh, my parents were busy. No, that could have reflected in a different way entirely, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so I can definitely see how this can be already uncovering some things for the people that are listening. But I'm also hearing the possibility of the awareness of us not creating this trauma, for this type of trauma for our children.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you use the example of like parents being addicted to work or parents that work all the time, immediately I thought to myself, I got to make sure I don't do that, right? Because I don't know if I want to have children. It's
Mm-hmm.
definitely not at the very top or even in the middle of my priority list right now. Um, but I do know that I have, in many times, in many spaces of my career, been addicted to work, right? Like been super focused on what needs to get done and when it has to get done, and on the deadlines and the timelines and all that other good stuff, right? And so as soon as you said that, I'm like, wow, I wonder how I can make sure that I don't create that kind of trauma for my children. So on that angle, or from that angle, how can we ensure that our behavior isn't creating
Mm-hmm.
traumas in our kids? But before you answer that question,
Mm-hmm.
whether you're watching on the replay or you're watching live right now, we are streaming live on Twitter, on YouTube, and on LinkedIn. We can check out your questions. So make sure you drop your questions in, and we will be putting them on the screen to make sure that we get answers for all of the questions. Also, this is an interactive conversation. So please, by all means, interact with us, jump into the comments, and we'll put your comments on the screen as well. So, yeah, what can we do to make sure that we are not the creators of the trauma and the people around us, those that look up to us, children especially?
That's another powerful question. Generational trauma used to be this concept of where people thought it was only from when a whole section of society was exposed to a certain kind of trauma. Like think about the Holocaust, think about racism, etc. Now that's a very strong sense of like where it comes from. However, within our own communities and like the little niches of our communities, we may belong to a generation of parents who, like for example, were born post-war or post the war period and had to build their lives up while they were building the economy. And so their focus starts to become now not on like the pleasures of life, taking time easy, like enjoying like the butterflies and whatever, but it's about making money, building the economy, having like a stable like household, etc. So their idea of validation and worth comes from that. Now, if you have a child in that space, this child comes to you with love, but you're like, love is not enough, honey. We've all heard our parents say, love ain't gonna get you like, a beautiful house or any of that. You got to make sure that you earn it yourself. And that's such unconscious projection of our own insecurities. It's so tough. But we now absorb it and think, yeah, fuck that. Like, I need to prove myself. Because my parents are not going to love me or recognize me unless I bring home money, have a beautiful house, have this great partner, have proved myself at school or university or like, any of those things, because that was how they got their validation. And so now they're projecting that sense of validation onto us. And so we think now that this is us. And next thing you know, we'll give this to our children. So I was asked once, how can I make sure that I'm not, passing this on to my kid, just as you asked. And the best way we can make sure we're good parents to our children is not by sending them to the best schools, not by sending them to the best therapists, but is by us being the best versions of ourselves. Now, what is that? That is us when we create the awareness of what's going on in our life to actually prioritize the healing. Most of us don't want to do that. The number one thing I go through at the start of my programs is when someone's like, you know what, I'm here because my partner fucked me up. And as they go through the journey, they realize, holy shit, I'm here really because I attracted a partner who played a part in me getting fucked up. And that's what we need to take responsibility for, especially as parents. We need to take responsibility, even as members of society, like fuck being parents. We need to take responsibility for how we show up. And as we show up with a more grounding, accepting, loving versions of ourselves, that's exactly what we'll project. Whatever we are, we will project. If we're insecure, we're upset, we need validation, we need achievement, we will project that onto our kids. But if we're more secure, we're more grounded, we're more compassionate, then we're more compassionate with our kids. We're more accepting and loving of how they show up and how they don't show up. And so truly, I think the way to be the best, member of society, parent, best lover also, is often to come back and say, what do I need to be the best version of me? And taking accountability to doing that.
I love that. And Quadira here is watching live through YouTube, and she says, yes, prioritize the healing. And it's that, what you were saying right now, prioritize that inner work that you need to do to make sure that you are showing up as the best version of yourself, so that you can use that to pour into the best version of you being what's showing up as a parent, the best version of you being what's showing up for your partner, the best version of you being what's showing up as a CEO or as a manager or as whatever the role or hat is that you are playing in your life in that moment. Because it is so easy to say, well, yeah, it's your fault. You mistreated me, or you spoke to me this way, or you did this to me, or you lied to me, or you cheated on me, right? But who allowed Yats into my life in the first place was me.
Exactly.
Right. And so where did I fail to create the proper boundaries with you to not allow certain behaviors to occur? Where did I fail to be selective and to dig into my self-worth of what I deserve in a partner, in a friendship, in a boss, in my income, from my clients, and with my programs, right? With what I charge, like all of these things. Start here. They start within. They start inside. We just tend to only look toward the outside to blame circumstances or people for the outcomes that we experience in life.
And so we do that because it becomes easier for us to absolve ourselves of the responsibility of work, right? If I can actually convince myself that someone else is the problem, then I've convinced myself that I don't need to do any work. But I've also unconsciously convinced myself that I'm not going to be able to grow. And that's the part we don't listen to. It's so easy when we project and we focus on the outside. And I get a lot of criticism at the start because my job is around battling people's egos. And at the start, when they come in, I'm always trying to break it down to them. But they're like, no, you're not listening. It's somebody else is doing this. And I said, sure, but how is that going to change your life now? How is that somebody else? Honestly, they're not in your life anymore. You're holding on to resentment with them. How are they going to help you heal? Who's going to do it? So, one of the biggest questions I like to ask people before we jump off this topic, especially with not passing on trauma, or even wanting to understand how we are projecting this trauma, is to ask ourselves why. Like whenever we show up in a moment where for example, working for validation. That's something I suffer from greatly, being like, a lot of us like high achievers out there who feel like I have to hit this deadline, I have to perform this way, I have to do this, because if not, I'm not going to be successful. When I stop and ask myself, where did this come from? Like, why am I working like this? Because nobody on the outside really cares. No one outside is really measuring. It's just me. But then when I break it down, I'm like, maybe I'm still trying to prove this to my dad and my mom. Maybe I'm trying to still prove to them that I'm worth it, that I'm like amazing, that I can be successful. And so really, when I think about it, I'm not even working for my own success. I'm working to prove my success to somebody else. So
That's powerful. That's powerful. And it's interesting that you bring that up, because that is the foundation of one of the biggest breakdowns that I ever had, was in fact following everybody else's definition of success instead of my own. So I started in media at a very, very young age. My mom opened a newspaper when I was 15, and she was like, "You're the only one that knows how to use a computer, so you're going to be the graphic designer, done deal." I was like, "What? I don't want to do this shit. This is nonsense." Teenagers, I was a teenager too. So long story short, I ended up falling in love with it. Like, I fell in love with doing the graphic design. I fell in love with, I eventually began writing for the newspaper. I had a column on like how to get into college with scholarships. I wrote it in Spanish and in English. Fast forward, I went from print to television to radio.
Wow.
But in between that, I opened my first dance studio in 2003. So I had just graduated from high school.
Right.
And I was at one point managing my radio career. So in the transition between radio and television, I was working mornings in radio. I was working evenings in television. I was still managing my dance studio, Gigi's Academy. And I wanted to get my master's degree, and I was doing it all at the same time until eventually I burnt out to the degree of I lost my vision while I was driving one day, and I could hear the car zooming past me and my hands like sweating on the steering wheel and not being able to see a damn thing. And so, of course I went to get checked, and I had like, I always say the story as I went to Dr. Google and I had everything under the sun, because that's the worst thing you can do when you feel anything scary. Like, do not Google it. Just go to your actual doctor. But I was just depleted. And I remember asking myself, like, why the hell am I doing any of this shit? Because on paper, I looked really, really successful. And in many ways, I was. But I wasn't feeling accomplished. I always felt like I needed one more thing to do. I needed one more thing. I needed one more gig, right? And it's because in the sphere of pleasing my parents, it was degrees, right? Like, college is a must. And the more degrees you have, the more money you're going to make, which is complete bullshit. But it was the belief that was given to me by my parents, right? And so I went for the bachelor's, and then I went for the master's. And then in television, what makes your high standing, right, is either news or sports. Like, that's where the most money is. That's where the big deal is. I tried news and I found it supremely depressing. So I moved on to sports. And then in radio, the top notch is doing mornings. So I worked my way up to mornings. But I never stopped to ask myself, what about in Gigi's life? Like, what makes Gigi feel successful? What makes me wake up in the morning and say, whether or not I'm making six figures, I feel really freaking good right now about what I'm doing, right? And eventually, it was in fact realizing what you just said, that I was pursuing everybody else's definition of success, and that leading me to a very scary burnout experience. That had my hormones unbalanced. I was losing my hair. I had breakouts everywhere. Like, it was a hot mess express. But when I realized that, I learned how to step back and how to look inward and say, what am I about and why have I been doing this? Because it's not just everybody else's definition of success. Is why did I feel I needed to follow everybody else's definition of success? I wanted to feel worthy. I wanted my mom to approve of me. I wanted everybody else to think I was successful. I wanted my bosses in radio and television to think like I'm worth the raise. I'm worth the position, but none of that self-worth was coming from me. I needed it from the outside. And that sucks. It sucked to feel that way. And I didn't even realize it until I nearly almost could have died on the highway. So how do we uncover that? How do we find if we have those self-worth issues?
You know what's funny also with all of those statements is that we use the word success so much, right? And we're talking about like, the money, the six figures, the success, all of that. What if we were able to track back all of those reasons we're working, and we were to replace it by love? Because in
Mm.
truth, that's actually what we want. The success is just a manifestation of the love that's delivered from our parents, or from the boss, or from society, or from the bank, which tells you you've got six figures. When you open up your bank account and you see like, holy shit, I've got $1 million, what you feel is not, I'm the queen of the world. You feel like I'm important, I am safe, I'm loved, I'm validated. And that's my favorite thing about reparenting, is because at one point I had to redefine my version or my idea of success. But what I realized I was doing is actually I was redefining my version of myself, not
Mm.
just what I found successful, but whether or not I was lovable if I chose this career or not, whether or not I was going to be lovable if I chose to live somewhere else, choose a different partner, speak a different language, any of those things. And so with reparenting, the strongest idea of like success is understanding, first and foremost, whose version of success, whose version of love am I still running and fighting for? And success is just one of the methods or the ways to get love. And if success is the way, like success is not everybody's driver. Some people don't care about making a lot of money, but they care about being attached to a partner for like, in different ways, wanting to do every single thing with them. For them, their idea of success is, as long as I have this person in my life and I'm attached to this person, I'm safe. So
Mm.
understanding what's behind the success. Why is it that the success is important? Because it makes me feel, like I said, loved, validated, safe, protected, recognized, a strong member of society. But all of those things mean I'm just being loved. So when I start to give myself love,
Mm.
then what happens to all of these fucking definitions that I've had of my life? What happens to the job I kind of choose? If I love myself so much and I'm not afraid of someone not loving me if I want to become a sweeper on the streets, then maybe I go and do it and I'm not really afraid of it. If I start to love myself so much that I want to choose someone who actually respects and likes their own boundaries, and not someone who texts me all the time, or someone who's chasing after me all the time, or someone who expects to validate me all the time, then suddenly I'm like, wow, this is a much better, more suitable relationship for me. But it all has to come with me redefining my version of myself, which comes from defining how I give myself love, how I reparent myself, how I see myself. For example, those same moments, and Gigi, you and I suffer from the same thing with like, this overachiever thing. And I'm so proud of you to see where you've come, especially having hurt so bad from that, that life of needing to overperform. And what's so funny is when you were talking about it, my job, because I'm a psychoanalyst, so I see straight through people's stories to who they really are. And I could see this little girl who, when you said, I loved being the graphic designer, I loved doing those things, what I actually see is a girl who loved it because her mom approved of it so much.
Mm.
I see a girl who was so happy because finally she got so much recognition from mama, that you were doing what mama wanted you to do in a space that mama loved, in a space that mama was comfortable. But I also see the inner child of Gigi being ignored bit by bit by bit. Why? Because now the parenting, or the parent side, or the validation side of Gigi was winning further and further. And so in our lives, there comes this like tumultuous time when, like you saw, you get this like huge burnout because the distance is just too far between your inner child and your like intuition and what really serves you, and where you are, even though it's successful, you make a lot of money and everybody else is happy, but not you. And
Yeah.
then when you get to this point and the distance is so heavy and there's burnout, you're like, okay, fuck this. How do I shift the scales a little more? And that's when we step into things like reparenting, discovering who we really are. What is it that really drives us? If we're constantly pursuing the lack of love we've had, we're always going to pursue the lack of success, the lack of money, the lack of whatever, because we're driving ourselves with scarcity. And so
Mm.
instead, when we start to give ourselves that love, now we drive ourselves with abundance. I am so lovable, so I'm going to make my own work hours. I am so lovable, so I'm going to charge what I think I deserve. I am so lovable, so I'm going to say, draw my boundary and say, no, I don't deserve this kind of person coming into my life, because I know how much I'm worth and I know how beautiful I am. Our quality of life just shoots so far up. But it's not about the adult version of who we are. It's about going back to the child version of who was not loved and who first created that identity of wanting to prove themselves.
I love that. And you're right on. You're absolutely right that I mean, you called me out right now on 3 different platforms and on the replay and like 5 others. But yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you. And and you talk about these topics so much. And it's why I felt it was absolutely necessary to have you on the show and to discuss this, because there are so many conversations that we've had around this that are digging into people's soul. I mean, we have multiple people that are watching now live that are really connecting with this and that are really diving inward with these conversations, with these topics that you're bringing up. And so before we dive into healing our inner child and into self-doubt and how to heal the trauma of self-doubt, we do have one question. And that question has come up as, I am a busy mom, or rather, not a question, but something that I think we could dive into. It says, I'm a busy mom and I struggle with stopping work to respond to my kids' needs. I recently committed to explaining myself better to them and shifting my life around to make more space for hugs and more. What commentary can you bring to this beautiful statement?
Kadira, if I'm pronouncing it right, I'm not sure if I am, but I hope that's good enough. First, I want to say it's amazing that you're prioritizing trying to explain yourself a little more to them and shift your life to involving more hugs. Hugs are so important because as human beings, every time, especially a child makes contact with his mother, primarily, even with a father or her father, there's an exchange of oxytocin. Oxytocin is what makes us feel safe, what makes us feel loved, what makes us feel protected. So it's very important that you're actually making space for that. One thing I would ask you to see, now I had this conversation with my community, and like my community has a huge population of single mothers. And I was explaining to them why the belief of I am a single mom, therefore I have to do everything is going to lead to more of I'm going to have to do everything. And not the belief that, yes, I am a single mother, but I do deserve rest. I do deserve to take time off. I do deserve to allow life to gift me things. I have seen single mothers who step into that life with so much belief, which actually requires so much reparenting, reprogramming, to show yourself that you are more important, truth be told, than the children that exist in your life. Now, this may be challenging because a lot of mothers are like, what are you saying to me? But think about it. Without you, those children would not exist. And if you were existing and those children came to being and then you disappeared, think about how the quality of their life would suffer. So by you giving yourself more space, time, love, validation, energy, peace, you will naturally be able to understand your children better. A lot of the time when children have needs and they're throwing tantrums, especially with single mothers, it's because they're not trying to aggravate the single mother. They're trying to express that their needs have not been met, but they don't know how to express it. So it comes out as a tantrum, misbehavior. I was like that. I had a very dysregulated nervous system because a child doesn't know how to rationally explain, like, hey, mother, you were 6 minutes late to pick me up. I'm very invalidated at this point. Instead, I'm going to be like, yo, what the fuck, bitch? I'm pissed off, So you're going to like ruin something. But what that child's trying to communicate is, I need love, mom. And I just feel like you're not able to give it to me because you're so consumed by like life, money, bills. And it's difficult. I know it's difficult to tell a single mother that, hey, don't work so hard, your bills will come to you, because she's going to be like, are you nuts? I don't have anybody to save me. I don't have anybody to balance me out. But that's exactly it. It's about reprogramming ourselves so we can believe it. We can believe that we deserve support. We believe that we deserve validation from the world. We believe that we deserve success coming our way, whatever it means, but we deserve a break. If you believe in those things, the universe is so abundant, you will attract it. Maybe it'll come in the form of like friends who become really supportive, a partner who shows up who's really good with kids, someone who comes with financial abundance and a gift into your life, any of those things. And when you believe you deserve it, it actually does show up on your doorstep. All you have to do is receive it. So
I love that. I love that. And it all starts right here. And so let's dive into, I know we've talked a lot about many different things, but specifically when we talk about the topic that we decided upon for this particular episode, the trauma of self-doubt. Before we dive into how this trauma really, truly, deeply affects us, how do we uncover the root of that self-doubt? Because it affects us, I think, with business especially, right? Like when you have self-doubt, First, you're not even sure if you can launch. If you somehow make it through launching, that self-doubt keeps you from scaling. It keeps you from growing. It keeps you from closing sales calls. It keeps you
Right.
from, pretty much everything. And so,
Mhm.
where is that initially rooted in, and how do we uproot that and replace it?
You know what's really interesting for me is that I can tell that you're in a secure and safe place in your life relationship wise. And so when you have to pick an associative topic of saying where self-doubt first hits you, like it really shows up in business, right? But
Yeah.
what's so crazy is that self-doubt shows up in everything, even how you'd want to cook, what decisions you want to make, relationships. That's one of the biggest places because you think, oh my God, I see these red flags, and your subconscious is bringing them up. But your doubt of whether you can have a better partner, you deserve a better life, you deserve someone to be respectful to you, all of that doubt makes you think, okay, let me just push all of this away and just accept and settle for what I have right now. Let me just accept this bad treatment, not draw a boundary because I don't know if I can have anything different. And so self-doubt actually shows up like everywhere, including procrastination. Procrastination is one of the biggest ways nobody realizes that what we're actually doing is telling ourselves, I don't believe I can have this. I don't believe I deserve this. So what am I going to do? I'm just going to keep delaying it. I'm going to keep delaying it. I'm going to keep delaying it. I don't believe I'm worth waking up at 6 a.m. because I don't know if my life's going to get better. I don't know if I'm actually worth the exercise, the healing, the feeling better. So I'm just going to keep procrastinating. So self-doubt like hits us literally everywhere. But one of the craziest things about self-doubt that people don't get, which is why like I'm so obsessed with reparenting, because I've seen how it changes lives, is self-doubt all tracks back to one thing. So self-doubt, which means I doubt the self, which means I don't feel strong enough about the self to make a decision, to believe in myself, to feel trustworthy. Where does that first come from? Remember our conversation way back when I talked about when a baby is born, when a child comes into this world, their identity of themselves is created based on observing how the world is treating them, is based on accepting and seeing, am I getting love or is love being held back? Am I being abused? Am I being ignored? Am I being invalidated? If I am, maybe that's because of me, because something's wrong with me. That is the first and the most powerful seed of self-doubt. And self-doubt exists in three very strong places, what we call the core wound in our philosophy of work and what we teach. And that's rejection, abandonment, and invalidation. You can take any pain on the planet, and I can always break it down to the fact that it means one of those three things for someone: that they feel somewhat invalidated, they feel somewhat rejected, or they're afraid of being abandoned. And all of those things are ultimately what drive our self-doubt. In work, for example, the fear of making a decision for work. You may ask me, like, how is that leading to me like being rejected or invalidated? Yeah, it's like, I don't know. What are you talking about there? But the fear of if I make a wrong decision, or the fear or of if I don't step up in this moment, the fear that maybe I don't even deserve to be stepping up in this moment because I've been abandoned before, all of that makes me not want to step into it because I'm afraid of being rejected. I'm afraid of being invalidated. Indecision is one of the worst things for neurochemistry, for like it ruins our neural pathways so much because it creates a lot of dissonance in how the brain should function and how the brain actually is functioning. And all of that comes from the lack of faith in my own decisions, because I'm afraid if I make the wrong decision, I'll get rejected. I'm afraid if I make the wrong decision, I'll be left. I'm afraid I'll make the wrong decision, I'll be alone.
Yeah.
I won't have success. If I don't work hard enough, I won't have the success. If I don't have the success, I won't have the love. If I don't have the love, ultimately, what do I feel? Abandoned or rejected.
Wow. Talk about going deep.
The only way I know how.
I love it. I love it. I love it. And so, in that space of now really deeply understanding these three roots of where this self-doubt would be stemmed, where it comes from, what is the first step to healing, to understanding and to healing?
The first step is always recognition, awareness. Because if we're not willing to recognize that there's something that's hurting us or bothering us right now, then what we're doing is we're letting our ego, we're letting our protective identity shelter us from seeing the truth, shelter us from seeing where we're hurt, yes, but also shelter us from seeing how we can grow from that hurt. So the first step is awareness. And I actually tell people that awareness is like a light bulb, right? So imagine you're in a bedroom. This is one of my favorite examples. You're in a bedroom and you're asleep on your bed, and you suddenly hear like this like weird thing rattling under your bed, and you're like, oh my God, what could it be? Could it be like a boogie monster? Could it be like something else, some like creepy animal, a snake? You have no idea because it's dark. And so you're like, you're afraid. But one day you get up and you switch on the light, and then you're like, whoa, it's just a cat that made its way into my bedroom. Now that you see it, you're not only not afraid, but you're like, what do I do with this cat? Either I can switch off the light and go back to bed in ignorance, or I can take the cat and put it outside, put it in a cage, whatever else you need to do. So awareness is the biggest step, which I think where in today's world we're trying to get more aware of. But spiritual bypassing, this thing where we also think, oh, I read all the inner work books, I go to church, or I go to this like, religious organization excessively. Like I do those things, but when you do them excessively as a justification, that's again ignoring the problem. Once you have the awareness, my favorite question is always to go backwards. Go backwards, ask yourself why. There's, I think you can ask yourself an unlimited amount of whys. You know when you're talking to a kid, maybe a niece or a nephew, and they're like, oh my God, look at the moon. And they're like, why is the moon white, Uncle Yats? And you're like, oh, that's because of the rocks that are like on the moon. But why are the rocks on the moon like that, Uncle Yats? And you're like, God damn it, how many of these am I going to have? How many whys can you have? But the truth is, if you keep going back with all those whys in your life, you almost always come back to the cause. And the cause inevitably almost is in your childhood. And the reason it's in your childhood is because that actually is scientifically proven through child psychology. That's when you first create your strongest impression of yourself. So the rest of your life is actually just reenacting everything that happened in your childhood. So if you want to change it, and you're just changing the symptoms right now, you're just changing the small factors that show up right now, you're just putting a Band-Aid on a wound. But if you go why, you're willing to go all the way back to see where the self-doubt comes from. And then you can tell yourself, okay, I want to change the story. Now, one last piece I want to add about that, about changing the story, which is why reparenting is so important. People are like, well, how can I change the story? I've already lived this and I'm an adult now. Like, how the fuck do you expect me to go back and do that, Yats? I feel like, I believe in God, the universe, etc. I feel like whoever is up there created us so intricately with all the questions and the answers within us, because your brain is capable of, when you slow down your brain vibration. So right now we're in a beta state, which is like very active and like you're very reactive. You're not really absorbing much. You're just like hyperactive and getting ready to like function. When you slow it down to like the subconscious state, where just before you go to bed, just when you get up, deep meditations, your brainwaves are so slow that they will absorb anything you give them, which is how people have taught themselves like languages like crazy in a few days, just by spending that time in those absorptive states. It also means that you can actually fool your brain into recreating a new identity for itself, as long as you're working in those parameters of the brainwave. So you can actually tell your brain a whole new story about yourself. If I went into my subconscious every day and I said, I'm Caucasian, I'm Caucasian, I'm Caucasian, I'm Caucasian, it's so funny. It won't matter what the world tells me, because I will believe I'm Caucasian and I'll act like it. It's so incredible. So when you use the same story to go back to going to those deep brainwaves and telling yourself, I am loved, I am loved, I am important, I am a child who's valued. My story, you imagine the same moments of trauma, of like invalidation where someone ignored you, and instead you recreate that story when now you pick up that same child and you hold them close. You rub their back gently, you hold their hair, you kiss them, you say, you're so important to me, I love you so much. So the same child who's invalidated in those moments, you instead give them the opposite, which is support, love, care, understanding, recognition. And you just watch. It's so crazy. Your brain starts to think now, wow, I'm worthy of support. I'm worthy of love. I'm worthy of validation. Why? Because I'm changing the story I believe about myself. And ultimately, that changes who you think you are yourself. That changes how you show up in the present moment. It's beautiful. I see, like, I have people coming into my groups, like men and women, and it's so amazing to see some of these really big guys, who like stereotypically we think have no emotions. You take them through an inner child thing. Everybody's inner children are so fucking cute and loving. It's insane. That's why when I see people, when you were talking about your story as a young girl, I saw your inner child like this, because I'm meant to. I train myself to. And I see these big people with these small little inner children. And you can just see when you take them so deep in their conditioning, they're like rubbing themselves like little kids, just making them feel loved. And it makes you feel so full, because when these people come out of it, they start living in a whole new way. Start feeling that love, living that love. It's like they're drinking the Kool-Aid that they've made themselves, but it's fucking good Kool-Aid. You know?
Yeah, man, because we've had so much of the other Kool-Aid,
Exactly.
We've had so much of the unworthy Kool-Aid. We've had so much of the I'm not enough Kool-Aid. We've had so much of the I have to do it a certain way in order to be accepted, or I have to be a certain way. I have to talk, dress, look, eat a certain way in order to be accepted, in order to be worthy of the opinions of others, of the love of others. That Kool-Aid, it don't taste so good, and it gives me
Yeah.
heartburn, and I am done with that shit. And so it's
Exactly.
why I love the work. I love the work that you're doing, and I think it's so necessary because it starts within. It starts inside. It starts in like you said, awareness, right? First
Yeah.
being aware of where our beautiful cracks are, right? Like, I
Mhm.
hate to use the word broken, because something that's broken, it's like, oh, you can't fix it. It'll never be the same. But they're
Exactly.
just beautiful cracks, right?
Mhm.
And through these beautiful cracks, we can let in lights, and we can let in knowledge and power and love, and use that to become better and to become stronger, right? And eventually that will heal those cracks, right? And so you said awareness is step one. Where
Mhm.
would we go next after that in healing and in overcoming this self doubt and the trauma of self doubt?
I think the important aspect I haven't touched on is in, all of this stuff we're talking about the mind, we forget about the body. But a huge
Mm,
part of like trauma or unconscious trauma is in the body, and how the body's actually saved these memories, how the body's so used to acting this way that it's going to keep acting this way. So the nervous system and regulating the nervous system are so tremendously important, because take for example a moment when you get triggered, right? And you suddenly get triggered by a partner, or like you needing to put in something for work, or someone like invalidating you somewhere. And when normally you just like fly off the bat, if you instead can regulate your nervous system to say, you are safe, you're not threatened, you're not in danger, this is just fear. When you're able to, like, through that subconscious process, like regulate your nervous system, what happens is you process this trigger a whole different way. So now that's step two, because think of a dysregulated nervous system like, oh my God, like, fuck you, they're the ones doing it, blah, blah, blah. Sorry, I use a lot of cusses on this, by
I
the way.
really don't care. I cuss like a
So,
fucking sailor, also. Go for it.
awesome. I love it. But when you now regulate the nervous system, think about it as that angry genie who was blocking Alibaba's tomb, and he's refusing you, like, for you to get in there. And now, by you regulating the nervous system, the genie's like, all right, I'm gonna head out, smoke a doobie, and chill or something. So the genie now steps away. Your nervous system is calm. Now you have access to your memories. Now you have access to the reason behind the trauma. So step two is regulating the nervous system and creating safety. You need to do this. I cannot like emphasize this enough for people, where they need to have at least 5 to 8 minutes every morning of just breathing, sitting with yourself, being able to just, if you can, meditate, grounding your nervous system, because then when you do get hit by trauma, it doesn't hit you as bad. When you do get hit by triggers, you don't feel as bad. Once you
Mm,
regulate that, step three then is to ask yourself, why is it that this hurts me so much? Why is it that this moment of when I have to put in this deadline thing for work, that I'm really working so hard at this point, that I'm trying to prove myself to this partner, or I'm trying so bad, or I'm waiting so much for their text? Why does it hurt me so much?
mm,
What am I afraid of? When we ask ourselves these questions, now, like I said, we're bringing everything back to us, right? We're not projecting onto the other person, because it's so easy to do that. That's not the kind of work we do. So you want to go deep and you say, what am I afraid of? The answer will almost always be, I'm afraid that if I don't text them so much, they're going to forget me and leave. Okay. One fear. I'm afraid that if I don't keep working, that I'm not going to be able to like get enough people coming in. I'm afraid that if I don't keep putting out posts, I'm not going to get enough leads, which means I'm not going to have people doing the gauntlet or any of my other programs, which means I'm not going to be able to pay my employees. Okay. That was my fear that I basically brought up here clearly. Um, any of those fears, where if you track them down, you look at the fear, and then you ask yourself, is this really true, or is my scarcity making it true?
mm.
You ask yourself, then you go even further and you say, what happens if that partner does leave me? What happens if I'm not successful at work? What happens if I don't get this to go exactly the way I want to? Then your next thing is, maybe it's not so bad. You may look at all the answers and say, oh, then this won't happen, this won't happen. But the baseline of it all is, then someone won't love me. I'll be alone. Um, my parents won't approve of me. If I don't have success, what will society think of me? All of those things, you keep narrowing them down question by question. You'll come back to the fact of saying, wow, maybe I need to show up better for myself. That's all it is. Maybe I just need to think about myself more. Maybe I need to sit myself in the quiet, in the alone time, and learn to love myself more. Maybe I need to appreciate myself without the noise. Maybe sometimes I need to disconnect from the pressures of the world, the judgments. Maybe I need to create my own opinions of who I am. All of that comes down to like, what is my identity of the self? Just as what we started in the conversations, what we're ending up with here. And it's all just a wounded projection of that. In fact, I wanted to add one last point, especially from the parenting aspect. When we talk about, take for example, a parent who wants their child to succeed and tells them, I just want what's best for you. So I want you to go to this school. I want you to go here. I want you to make 6 figures because that's what will be really good for you. Let's take that parent for an example and see and really ask, are they doing what's best for their child? Or are they doing what they think is best for their child based on what they didn't get? Right? Because then now they're basically trying to control their child's life so that they don't feel afraid.
Yeah.
My mom prided just like you. She pushed all of us to go to like get like master's degrees and go to big schools and all of that. Why? Because when she was really young, her family couldn't afford to send her to a really good school. So it became her life's mission for her kids to go to all these schools. Why? At the end, not for them to be successful, but so that she could feel like her life was complete. So we unconsciously control the people we love because it's easy for us to project our insecurities on them. Whereas if we bring our insecurities back to us and say, how can I deal with it? Now, all we're giving to the people we love, is acceptance for who they really are, their desires to achieve whatever dreams they want, support along the way, letting them know that if they fail, they get hurt, they go through breakups, they'll fall down, that is their lesson. But support is what we can provide.
I absolutely love that. Oh man, I feel like I could talk to you for a couple days in a row, but
Thank you. I
we
appreciate
do
it.
want to keep this. We do want to keep this at a decent amount of time. I know you have so many other
We do
things
want
going
to
on
let people
today.
go to sleep tonight.
At some point, right? So yeah, it's for those that are watching live right now, that are watching on the replay. How do we go into a deeper work with you? What does it look like to work with you in your coaching space?
So I have I've been blessed, but have made a choice also to move away from one-on-one. So I know a lot of people ask about one-on-ones, but I feel like I can design a system where I can give more of my value or knowledge to more people in a group setting. So there's different ways that happens. The number one way to follow any content that we put out is Instagram. So on Instagram, I go by The Inner Yats. So just as Gigi's put out there, you can follow us, and I put out a lot of content about pain points, about work, etc. You can check out my website, which is theinneryats.com. But if you really want to do deep, deep, deep work, we have had a very successful program. Again, I'm grateful to like all the things around me, including myself, for having like worked at it. But it is such a successful program that takes people back to the root of what it is that's beating up their self-doubt, lack of worth, inability to have love, self-sabotage, all of those, because that's all coming from their childhood conditioning. And so reparenting is the biggest part of that program. And it's designed over 8 weeks, which takes people through different themes of each week so that they can do the right amount of work through subconscious meditation. So I'm trained in battling the subconscious, working with the subconscious and the ego. So I take people really deep into theta level meditations, etc. The gauntlet is for people who really want to dive really deep. But we also have something called the Emotional Freedom Collective, which is a membership for people who are like, you know what, Yats, I want to start on the surface just a little bit, get to know the inner work, feel safe before I really dive into something deep. And so that's something else that's available. I think all of those options are available on the Inner Yats, or on the Instagram with the link in the bio. You can find all that stuff on there. So
I love it. Thank you again for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk with you and to learn from you and to I it's funny because I feel like when we are on this side, and I'm sure you've experienced this
Mhm.
also, when I'm on this side of the process of the conversation, right? Like my brain is on the listening carefully to to ask
Mhm.
all of these questions, right? And
Right.
when I can tell, as I'm listening, where a follow-up question might come in, or to be alert with the chat, right? And with
Mhm.
what other people are asking. But I feel like I also definitely have to come back and listen to the replay myself so that I can hear it from the other
Yeah.
side. Like just as a listener, not in guiding this interview,
Right.
what more things could come up for me, because even in the process of just leading the interview, so many things that you mentioned have been incredibly powerful for me. And so I know that it's the same for everyone that's tuning in now, whether they're on live or they're on the replay. So I want to thank you for taking the time to share this knowledge with us, because this is where the root of healing comes, and the root of changing the world and making it a better place comes from each and every individual being able to heal all of these layers that we have talked about today. So thank you for sharing that with us. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show.
Oh, Gigi, thank you as well. Like, I really am grateful for you and the work that you're doing, because I follow you on your social media as well. And I see how you guide and empower so many of these women. And what I love about your work is sometimes I feel jealous about it, is because I feel now people expect so much of stuff just around my inner work that I can't be personal enough on that social media. And I love that you can, and you're fearless about it. And that's a lesson that I take from, and I want to learn more of, like, how to be fearlessly in that space. All of us have spaces we can grow. So I think you're doing it really well for your whole community. You're setting such a strong example. And even the work that you teach them through all that you do to be successful is really phenomenal. So I want to thank you for what you give to the world, and also for having me here and bringing people together to listen to this conversation. So, and I'm glad it finally happened. That
I
neither of us was like, oh, shit, yeah, no,
know.
can we do another week? Something came up.
I love it. I love it. Thank you once again, Yats, for being with us. This is the Chats with Gigi podcast. Maybe you're catching it live. We also broadcast on YouTube, on LinkedIn, and on Twitter. And we have amazing speakers that come in every week to discuss, to share, to enlighten, and to pour into us, because we want to make sure that we're doing everything that we can. You already know what our motto is in Seizing Happy, and that is to nurture the business and the woman behind the business equally, because everything around you, your relationships, your income, everything around you is a reflection of you. It's a reflection of what's going on inside, your thoughts, your emotions, your feelings, and so much of this that we've talked about today, the underlying stuff that needs to be healed, whether or not you're consciously aware of the fact that it is there and it is making decisions for you. So if this episode of the show has been powerful for you, has been useful to you, we would love to know. So please let us know in the comments. And if you are listening on a podcasting platform, make sure that you subscribe. Make sure that you also leave us your reviews and join the conversation. Follow Yats, follow all of our speakers. We're here to continue this conversation. I only bring people on the show who I know have an open heart and are ready to communicate directly with you and are ready to dive deep into the work, whatever that work is, with you one-on-one. So thank you once again for being here.